Good evening, and this evening I shall be reading from another of my pamphlets, Empowering the Precariat. Guy Standing's A Precariat Charter and its Programme for the Poor and Borderline Unemployed. Guy Standing's a political scientist, and a few years ago he wrote A Precariat Charter. He identified the precariat as people who were in employment but whose job security was precarious, hence precariat. And they're the people who suffer under the gig economy, people on 0 hours contracts and the like. This has become a very relevant issue because last week Angela Rayner told a group of, I think it was apprentices in Scotland, that Labour was going to give them greater employment rights. And then Keir Starmer immediately said, no, we're not going to do that. And then he denied that they were rowing back on it. So, here's the pamphlet. And its programme for empowering people on 0 hours contracts, other people in similar tenuous employment. Guy Standing's A Precariat Charter, London, Bloomsbury. Pardon me, throwing my papers around here. Is the sequel to his earlier The Precariat. The precariat is the term he uses for the class of people trapped in low-paid, insecure work, with frequent withdrawals from the job market due to unemployment or the need to look after or raise a family. They are the people trapped on short-term or 0 hours contracts, humiliated by the DWP and its regime of benefit sanctions and endless means tests. They are often overqualified for the menial and low-status jobs they are forced to perform. Thus, they include the graduates flipping burgers in the local McDonald's or signing on with the employment agency to do some kind of clerical work. They have been created by the policy of successive governments of creating flexible labour markets. They include large numbers of women and also immigrants and asylum seekers who find themselves excluded from more secure jobs. Standing calls them the precariat because of their precarious employment position, which also excludes them from enjoying full citizenship. As well as neoliberalism, he also criticises the social democratic parties for their exclusive concentration on securing rights for the labour, meaning primarily male breadwinners in secure employment, while ignoring other kinds of work. His book describes not only the emergence of this growing class of working poor, but also provides a programme of 29 points, the charter of the title, to improve their conditions and restore them from denizens, inhabitants of a country with few or no civil rights, to citizens. Much of the book is devoted to discussing the plight of migrants whose civil rights in the countries to which they have immigrated in search of work have been stripped away. This has been done by governments keen to show that they are cutting down on immigration and the supposed threat this causes to the host nations. This attack on their social and legal status was particularly acute when the book was published in 2014. But the need to protect them and their rights has become even more pressing now in 2016, with the massive increase in casual racism after the victory of the Brexit campaign and the referendum. Neoliberalism's assault on citizenship. He describes the way the neoliberal capitalism of the late 20th and early 21st century invaded and overturned the automatic link between residence in a country and citizenship. On pages 2 to 3 he writes, "It fell to T.H. Marshall in 1950, writing after the Second World War, to define citizenship in its modern form as a status bestowed on those who are full members of a community. To be a citizen meant having an absolute right to a certain standard of civilization which is conditional only on the discharge of the general duties of citizenship." While Marshall's later conception of the duties of citizenship included a duty to labour, with which this book takes issue, he recognised the tension between rights and capitalism, noting that in the 20th century, citizenship and the capitalist class system have been at war. Citizenship imposed modifications on the capitalist class system, since social rights imply an invasion of contract by status, the subordination of market price for social justice, the replacement of the free bargain by the Declaration of Rights. That was roughly correct in the re-embedded phase of Karl Polanyi's The Great Transformation, 1944-2001, for the period of social democrat supremacy between 1944 and 1970s. In the subsequent disembedded phase, contract has invaded status, and social justice has been subordinated to the market price. On pages 8 to 9, he further describes the way residents in nations across the world have been stripped of their rights as citizens. Until the 1930s, the conventional view was that over the long run, in a democratic society, residence and citizenship should coincide. Brubaker in 1989. This would not be true today. Many residing in you will see, this is all due to the printer, in a country never obtained citizenship or the rights attached to it. Others who have resided since birth lose rights that supposedly go with citizenship. Many denizens not only have limited rights, but also lack the right to have rights. Asylum seekers denied refugee status are an example. Migrants who cannot practice the occupation for which they are qualified are another. Often they do not have the means or the procedural avenues to contest their marginal status. Many lack the capacity to claim or enforce rights, or fear that the act of asserting a claim or a right would have a high probability of retributive consequences or disastrous costs. Others have no avenues at all for pursuing nominal rights. There are 6 ways by which people can become denizens. They can be blocked from attaining rights by laws, regulations, or non-accountable actions of state bureaucracies. The costs of maintaining rights can be raised. They can lose rights due to a change in status, as employee, resident, or whatever. They can be deprived of rights by proper legal process. They can lose rights de facto, without due process, even though they may not lose them in a de jure legal sense. And they can lose them by not conforming to moralistic norms, by having a lifestyle or a set of values that puts them outside the range of protection. He mentions the way people can be stripped of their rights through being convicted as criminals. This is an important point. While I have absolutely no objection whatsoever to crims in prison losing their right to vote as part of their punishment, in America the process has gone much further than that in some states. If you have committed a crime, you automatically lose your right to vote in perpetuity, even after you have served your sentence and been released as a free man or woman. He summarizes the situation thus. In sum, denizenship can arise not just from migration, but also from an unbundling of rights that removes some or all of the rights. Standing's programme for restoring citizenship, prosperity and self-worth, as well as a chapter describing the emergence of the precariat and the social and economic forces that have created and exploited, he presents a charter for improving their conditions in Chapter 5. This includes the following articles. Article 1. Redefine work as productive and reproductive activity. Basically, it isn't just work outside but also inside the home, voluntary work, off-the-clock work, performed for their jobs but outside working hours, and the work performed in the lengthy process of applying for benefits, going to interviews, filling out forms, performing job searches on the net. Article 2. Reform labour statistics. Standing states that this should be to allow policies to be framed which aren't labourist and are ecologically sensitive. This means not simply identifying whether people are in work or not, but also containing details on their work patterns, occupational skills, social income and patterns of social mobility. He is particularly concerned that the labour statistics should show where people are working, and working hard, but their jobs do not provide enough for their subsistence. Article 3. Make recruitment practices brief encounters. Here Standing argues again that the job application process should be regarded as work, and recommends that incentives should be in place to prevent the use of long and complex recruitment processes that force the precariat to spend valuable time and money and which place them under stress. The software used to screen applicants should observe all the relevant ethical codes, including those on personal information and references. Article 4. Regulate flexible labour. Here the object should not be to oppose flexible working per se, but the loss of rights and other protections which are part of it at the moment. This also means, just one moment, this also means getting rid of the work capability test introduced by New Labour and carried out first by Atos and now under the Tories by Maximus. Sorry, I've confused. Here the object should not be to oppose flexible working per se, but the loss of rights and other sections which are part of it at the moment. This also means greater regulation of the employment agencies who effectively keep people on 0 hours contracts. Article 5. Promote associational freedom. This means developing new forms of unions and work associations that are able to act for the precariat. Article 6 to 10. These are measures to reconstruct occupational communities. These measures include Article 6. Set up an international occupational accreditation system so that general standards can be established across countries and qualifications and accreditation systems can be harmonized, so that the precariat, who are often highly qualified individuals, can practice their skills in this largely unregulated area. Article 7. Roll back licensing. Here Standing recommends cutting back on the system of state licensing of occupations when this is not done for reasons of health or safety, for example in medicine, but simply to push up fees or to give the profession an elite status. Article 8. Mutualise occupational regulations. Professional boards should not be composed exclusively of either insiders or outsiders. Instead, all levels of the profession should be represented within them, including the junior and insecure branches, to make sure they are not exploited. Article 9. Promote collaborative bargaining. This means formalising the bargaining process between different jobs, so that the vulnerable groups in these professions are also represented. Articles 11 to 15 are intended to stop class-based migration policy. This means ending the double standard that allows the massively wealthy to go wherever they want while excluding the poor, who may desperately need sanctuary of the job opportunities available in the countries to which they wish to migrate. Article 11. Curb labour export regimes. This means ending the schemes operated by countries such as China, Vietnam and some other nations, in which workers are exported en masse to work on projects elsewhere around the world. Standing states that this form of labour is linked to convict and quasi-slave labour. It is very also extremely uncomfortably similar to the infamous coolie trade in the 19th century, in which poor labourers from what is now India, Pakistan, Bangladesh and China were exported to plantations in the Caribbean and South America to supply the shortage of labour left over by the abolition of slavery. Article 12. Stop making migrants denizens. Here Standing argues for the repeal of the various laws that discriminate against immigrants, making them second-class citizens and leaving them extremely vulnerable to exploitation, racist victimisation and coercive and intrusive forms of state control. Article 13. Stop class-based migration policy. This means ending current immigration legislation around the world which discriminates against poor migrants in favour of the rich. Article 14. Treat migrants as labour market equals. This means tackling and imposing legislation that would discriminate against migrants in favour of providing work and votes for the host population. Article 15. Stop benefit discrimination. Immigrants are subject to increasing restrictions on the benefits they can claim, which has encouraged the growth of immigrant ghettos marked with poverty in many countries. Article 16. Ensure due process for all. All over the world, people are being gradually stripped of their civil rights piecemeal. In Britain, Chris Grayling, the Conservative Justice Secretary, denied accused prisoners the right to choose their own lawyers, and cut legal fees. In employment, in 2013, the Tories passed legislation that made it compulsory for employees claiming unfair dismissal to pay a fee to take their case to a tribunal. This service had previously been free. This also includes the system of conditionality, in which benefit claimants are forced to perform lengthy and stressful tasks. Other abuses to be reformed included nudge questionnaires, official forms which penalise applicants if they give the wrong answers to deliberately vague or intrusive questions, and community services, which is increasingly used as community punishment and a form of unpaid labour. Finally, following the riots of August 2011, David Cameron, the then Conservative Prime Minister, demanded further authoritarian legislation to prevent and make difficult public protests. Article 17. Remove poverty traps and precarity traps. This means ending the cuts to benefits that force people into low-paid work that keeps them in poverty. It also means ending the benefits regime that as most people in them never progress to permanent work. There are also other traps involving cutting benefits and imposing conditions on absent fathers paying child maintenance, and released prisoners signing on at the job centre. Article 18. Make a bonfire of benefit assessment tests. Standing argues that these infringe people's freedom and are deliberately designed to humiliate, degrade and punish benefit recipients so that they automatically obey authority. Those assessment tests singled out for particular criticism are for job seekers, means-tested benefits, disability, pensioners, and those seeking to receive help from charities. Article 19. Stop demonising the disabled. This means dismantling the system of conditionality imposed by both New Labour and the Conservatives in order to throw more disabled people off welfare. At the heart of this attack on the rights of the disabled is an approach which is not concerned with their medical and physical needs so much as their supposed ability to work. This also means getting rid of the work capability test introduced by New Labour and carried out first by Atos and now under the Tories by Maximus. Article 20. Stop workfare now. Standing states the case against workfare quite clearly in this paragraph. Workfare, compulsory labour as a condition for receiving benefits, punishes the precariat and should be stopped. It is unfair. It increases inequality. It increases social and economic insecurity. It costs more than it saves in terms of public spending. It undermines the right to work. It is stigmatising at the time and long after. It is politically and socially divisive, and it worsens the labour market and the economic situation of others. Privatised workfare is an unproductive scam. Article 21. Regulate payday loans and student loans. The massive rise in payday loan companies risks forcing millions of people in serious debt into absolute grinding poverty and homelessness. The underlying problems that force people to turn to short-term loans desperately need to be addressed, so that rather than a colossally exploitative growth industry, these loans will become rare. Similarly, student loans also saddle graduates with a debt and creates a workforce that is less able to bargain for good wages or defends its economic and social rights. Article 22. Institute a right to financial knowledge and advice. Article 23. Decommodify education. The commodification of the educational system means that schools and universities now create a standardised educational product which enforces conformity and reflects the existing class structure. This should be challenged and abandoned, and the original purpose of education, to create better, informed and intellectually questioning individuals and raise the cultural level in society, should be restored. As it stands, this has been abandoned and the educational system reformed so that it is merely a mechanism for turning out the workers industry claims to need. Article 24. Make a bonfire of subsidies. In other words, stop state support for the overpaid big business. Article 25. Move towards a universal basic income. Article 26. Share capital via sovereign wealth funds. These should be set up to redistribute wealth downwards from the rich to the poor through taxing particular kinds of the wealth gained through the exploitation of resources, which include not just those in nature but also financial, such as hedge funds. An example of these type of funds in the Alaska Permanent Fund, set up by the Republican Governor Jay Hammond in 1976. There are three aspects to the fund. The first is a source of revenue from 25% of the royalties the state makes from Alaska's oil, a savings fund used for investment, and a permanent fund dividend calculated from the fund's investments and paid annually to every person legally resident in Alaska. Standing links the idea back to Thomas Paine, the 18th century radical, in his Agrarian Justice. But it also goes back to Thomas Spence, another 18th century radical, who argued that parishes should own all their land and provide each of their citizens with an income derived from the land's rents. Article 27, revive the commons. Here standing does not mean the House of Commons, but common public amenities that are being privatised or closed as part of the government's austerity programme. These include parks, swimming pools, libraries and other public institutions or property, including public toilets and sculptures held by the local authority. Article 28, revive deliberative democracy. Standing is here concerned to tackle and roll back the commodification of politics that has occurred under economic neoliberalism for the benefit of the corporate elites. Major industries and business sponsor political parties, which in turn pass legislation that favours them against the rest of society. In the 2010 election, for example, half of the Conservatives' funding came from the City of London. One of the radical methods for reviving democracy may be deliberative grants under the ancient Greek statesman Pericles. Citizens were paid to attend public meetings at the Agora and exercise their political powers and rights as a member of a democracy. Ackerman and Ayres have recommended that each citizen should have a card which they can use to spend a limited amount of money on the party of their choice to stimulate democratic participation. They also recommend that there should be deliberation days held 2 weeks before American presidential elections so that the electors, not the elites, should discuss the issues. Article 29, remarginalise charities. Charity has been increasingly used by successive neoliberal governments as substitutes for government welfare programs. It is related to the introduction of conditionality in the benefit system, as well as being moralising and paternalistic. Some of the policies introduced through this, such as the voucher schemes proposed by over half of English councils, to be given to the poor instead of grants and loans, are an attempt to control the lives of the poor themselves. They are infantilizing and controlling, and the costs of implementing these schemes are huge, consuming about 20% of the funds allocated to them. Ending neoliberalism, combating precarity. This effectively means stemming the various neoliberal policies that have led to the emergence of this new class of the dispossessed, as well as democratic deficit in which Parliament has been sidelined in favour of a presidential style of politics, and the social and economic policies formulated by think tanks and corporations. This means abandoning some of the policies that have gradually developed over 3 decades and more, such as workfare. This was first discussed in the early 1980s by conservative politicians based on some of the experiments in Ronald Reagan's Republican Party in America. Some of the policies recommended by Standing are extremely radical indeed, such as the universal basic income. This may be too radical, although it has growing support from politicians, activists and economists. But other parts of the programme are desperately needed. Common sense policies to tackle the growing poverty, inequality and political stagnation in our societies, dominated as they are by the corporate elites. These are determined to prevent any democratic debate that poses a challenge to their power, and have impoverished millions around the world in the quest for unrestrained power and profit. We need to check their power and give it back to the poor and ordinary people in order to restore citizenship and vitality to democracy. Thank you for listening.